Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Margaret Mueller. I'm the president and CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. We're going to give everyone just a minute or two to settle in. And while we're going to share a video that's highlighting some of the amazing women's leadership programs from the last year, and also a word from one of today's sponsors, Merrill.
When I was growing up, I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I knew the kind of woman I wanted to be. I wanted to be a woman in charge. I wanted to be able to pay my own bills. I wanted to have a man's life in a woman's body.
When people are like, oh, you're working with women, is it a nonprofit? Is it philanthropy? I'm like, I'm an ex-trader at Goldman Sachs. No, I believe that you can make money and have women shine. And you know in your own households and women that you know that they get stuff done and they get lots of things done at the same time.
When you're the founder of the company, the day you start your company, it's no longer about you. That's artists think that way. But you think that this is the company. The company is like, you know, a company of soldiers or a company of the ballet company or a fellowship, right? Where everybody's bringing in their awesomeness and together we're making something greater than the sum of its parts.
So I think it's important when people are telling you no to understand why are they telling you no and work on that, because there is a reason behind it. Is it trust? Is it like that you're not ready in terms of numbers? Is it that, I mean, there is a clear reason. So you need to like really dig into that reason.
And that's what education does. It opens our eyes to realize we can be something else, not what everybody's telling us.
What's important there is to build relationships and to bring to the table your perspective as a business leader.
I've learned that you can command power through fear. That only gets you so far. If you use power because you're respected, it's so much better.
Because I always say the most important relationship is the relationship you have with yourself. Because once you have that, any other relationship is a plus.
It all comes down to a single, defining moment. When a plan stops being a plan and gets set into motion. Today's Merrill can help you get there with the people, tools, and personalized advice to help turn your ambitions into action. What would you like the power to do?
Okay, so hopefully everyone's settled in. I want to thank the Leadership Series sponsors for this new season that's kicking off with today's program, Energy BBDO and Merrill. So as you may have noticed this season, we're really excited to use this new webinar platform, GoToWebinar. A few tips and tricks for those of you for whom this is new. If you hover your mouse in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you'll notice a small orange arrow. Clicking this arrow opens up the GoToWebinar control panel, and you'll notice some drop-down arrows, including a GoToWebinar how-to handout with this information, as well as some more information on today's program and upcoming sessions. There's also a small arrow to pop out the questions box where you'll be able to submit your questions to our panelists. And if you run into any technical issues, just email programs@executivesclub.org. And we have many staff members who are on hand to assist, and that will also be in the chat. So before today's panel begins, I want to take a moment to introduce Dean Harrison, who's President and CEO of Northwestern Memorial Healthcare and the newly elected chair of the Board of Directors of the Executives Club. So please join me in welcoming Dean to his new post.
Thank you, Margaret. It's an honor to be here today representing the Board of Directors of the Executives Club as we enter our 110th season. The club has a rich history as a leader in professional development and providing opportunities to enrich business relationships across industries. Over the last 6 months, the club has provided a rich array of timely and responsive programs, striving to connect our members during these challenging times. I look forward to an exciting season filled with great speakers, and I also look forward to seeing everyone in person one day soon. Margaret, thank you for letting me say hello, and back to you.
Thanks so much, Dean. So last month marked 100 years since the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. As we celebrate this milestone, how do we continue to encourage women to engage with the political system, run for office, get out and vote, and more? To answer these questions, I am thrilled that this dynamic group of women have come together to bring their unique perspectives and discuss the importance of women's involvement in politics. So now I would like to turn it over to Tina Chen, President and CEO of Time's Up, who will be leading today's discussion.
Oh, well, thank you, Margaret. I am really thrilled to be here. I'm really honored to be part of this panel with these amazing women to talk about women's political leadership. I think all of us who are on this panel have been involved in women's political leadership and building it for so many years. I will also say that I think it's one of the things, especially during this season when there's so much focus on the political landscape, that it is a piece that affects how we think about women's leadership in all domains, in all the various areas in which the members of the executive club operate in, the private sector, in the not-for-profit sector, because what we see around women's leadership on the screen during this kind of crazy season that we're in really it translates to our entire culture. I will say one of the things we're doing at Time's Up right now is a nonpartisan effort to call out racist, sexist, misogynistic reporting on women candidates when we see her, called We Have Her Back. And if you're interested in that, you can text the words "her back" to 30644 to get more information about that as the election season continues. This is, as Margaret said, going to be a nonpartisan conversation. We've got folks from both sides of the aisle represented here, but who all have a shared experience about being women in politics and what the challenges are and what it means to be a leader like that. So that's how we're going to keep our conversation, is to talking about that, keeping it nonpartisan, and really being able to learn from each other's experiences. I'm going to start, everyone's going to, rather than do a long introduction, I want them each to sort of tell you their own story and weave into that the challenges that they faced, and that's how we'll get to know all of them. And we're going to start kind of somewhat chronologically in their involvement in politics. I get to start with, a dear old friend of mine. We have been through many wars together, and she's on the phone, so we don't have her video, but she is with us by audio. So let me start with Ambassador Carol Moseley Braun. Carol?
Thank you, Tina, and I'm delighted to be with you. I apologize for not being on video. We did everything we could to get the GoToWebinar to take my face, but it wouldn't do that, so I'm on the phone only. But it is a wonderful thing to be a part of this great panel of women, all of whom I respect and have worked with for years. You're looking at the cream of the political class on this webinar. And I'm delighted that you thought to invite me and to allow me to participate. The point is, we're talking about suffrage today and the role of women. And I want to make the point that this year, which you may have heard before, 2020, marks the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, giving women the right to vote. In spite of the glorious words of our founding charters, women had to wait until August 18, 1920, to be able to participate in our democracy as citizens. The story, and I'm going to read those words to you because they inspire me every time I see it. And part of it is, and that's where the problem begins. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then it goes on to say that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's the preamble to our Constitution, as everybody on this call knows already. But the problem is, particularly with regard to Black women, that both race and gender got in the way of our participating in the political process of being full citizens. And in fact, I would make the point today that politics follows culture, not the other way around. So if the popular will is for someone to be empowered or to be included in our democracy, then that's what will happen. But it takes the popular will to make it happen regardless. And so with regard to women, it took until 1920. With regard to Native Americans, it took until 1924. And Black people, Black men and female, did not really get empowered to participate as voters, as full citizens, until the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s. So in addition to taking that long view, the truth is that, again, the society has been moving in the direction of perfecting our democracy. And it is from that women's vote came, and that the enfranchisement of African Americans came. Because before that, it was just men, and frankly, in what I just read in terms of the preamble to the Constitution, Jefferson was really talking just about men, and men is capitalized in both those things, that among these, that governments are instituted among men with capital M. He did not include women. He did not include indigenous people. He did not include people, frankly, who did not have money. So poor whites could not vote either. And so we have been moving in the direction of perfecting our democracy ever since. And women getting the right to vote is part of that story. But I'm gonna digress for a second and talk about it was a single vote in the Tennessee legislature that confirmed and passed the 19th Amendment for the United States, which culminated a long process about ratification. The backstory, frankly, about that surprise vote, it was a single vote that did it, that passed the suffrage amendment, tells us a lot about this country and about the point that I'm making, that the politics follows culture. Henry Burns switched his vote to support votes for women. He had been a no vote because he had received a letter from his mother telling him to do so. And she wrote, vote for suffrage and don't keep them in doubt. Don't forget to be a good boy and put the rat in ratification. But the irony there is that Mrs. Burns' motivation points to the bizarre confluence of race and gender that has always characterized American society and the culture. Many of the white women who agitated for suffrage had been abolitionists, but Henry Burns' mother, who wrote that very pivotal letter, she was annoyed because she was a college-educated white woman and was offended that black men under the 15th Amendment could vote and she could not. Black women, in addition, had to wait an additional 4 decades to enjoy the electoral franchise. But even before the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was made law, theoretically opening the ballot box to all Americans, black women challenged the barriers to their participation by running for office. In 1928, Minnie Buckingham Harper became the first black woman state legislator. She had been appointed to the post. The first black woman to run for and get elected to a state legislature was Crystal Byrd Fawcett in 1938, and she served for 2 years in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. A decade later, in 1952, Cora Mae Brown was elected to the Michigan State Senate. Also in 1952, Charlotta Bass was a vice presidential candidate on a third-party ticket, the Progressive Party. It was not until 1962 that a second black woman was elected to a state Senate seat, and that was Berta Freeman Welcome. Then in 1966, and many of us were around in 1966, Yvonne Braithwaite Burke was elected to the California State Assembly. 2 years later, in 1968, Shirley Chisholm from New York was elected as the first black woman to the United States House of Representatives. In 1972, Chisholm broke ground again, running for president of the United States. By then, she had been joined in the Congress by Yvonne Braithwaite Burke and Barbara Jordan from Texas. Barbara Jordan, of course, was the first black elected from Texas. And they were joined by Curtis Collins from Illinois in 1973. I was elected to the United States Senate in 1992, the first black woman in the history of this country to be elected. So now in 2020, we've got 22 black women in the U.S. House of Representatives, Senator Harris in the Senate, 6 black women in statewide executive offices, 72 state senators, 232 state representatives. So I want to make the point again that black women are in the interesting confluence. The intersectionality is what Kimberly Crenshaw would call it, because people get confused as to whether or not we're to be considered women first or be considered black first. And frankly, I've always said it almost doesn't make a difference. If you're being oppressed by somebody, it almost doesn't matter why they got their foot on your neck, that whether it's because you're female or because you're black, it's what you want to look at is the foot. So, and I want to go back, though, a century ago and quote Anna Julia Cooper, who's one of my role models. She says she was a suffragist and an abolitionist, and she coined the phrase, when and where I enter, in the quiet undisputed dignity of my womanhood, without violence and without suing or special patronage, then and there, the whole Negro race enters with me. So Anna Julia Cooper saw her responsibility to carry, again, not just the interests and aspirations of women, but the interests and aspirations of Black people generally when she got in what she does. And so that becomes our challenge today, to understand that racism and sexism, misogyny, those things go hand in hand. They spring out of the same set of motivations, which is power, of course. And but that power is something that comes out of the culture first and then goes into the politics. And so I rest my case. That's all I had to say for this morning, and I'm delighted to be part of this panel.
Oh, thank you, Carol. And that sort of sets our historical context up beautifully. So thank you so much. You know, I next want to turn to someone I have admired from afar, even though I'm on the other side of the aisle, because she's smart and she's witty and she's tough. And I have seen her as a role model for me, you know, for years. And this is a great opportunity, Mary, for me to actually say this to you on a public forum. So I'm delighted to do that. So let me turn it over to Mary Matlin to sort of both introduce her personal history to you too, and talk about, you know, the challenges she's faced and overcome as a woman in politics.
Well, thank you for including me, and ditto for all the honorifics that all of y'all have said. It's always a pleasure. And I've been trapped with my husband for who's counting. So it's delightful to be with some women, some people of sense. Who am I? I grew up in South Chicago. I worked at United States Steel. My mother wasn't allowed to go to college. She wasn't even allowed to go to nursing school. She was, however, allowed to go to beauty school. So I spent till I was able to work in the steel mills, working in the beauty school. And in fact, was in beauty school when a professor of mine called me and asked me, he had stopped teaching for the sole purpose of working on the United States Senate race out of Chicago in 1980, and asked me if I wanted to come be a grunt. And I said, I'd rather do hair. No, I said, of course, I'll be there tomorrow. I do cut my own hair, so there is a, and actually this hairdressing skill, I have done 4 colors and over a dozen haircuts masked in the COVID thing. So it's helped me out through lots of times. Anyways, in that race, ironically and deliciously, Ambassador, you beat the man who beat me in my first political race. So I love the whole karma. So thank you for that.
That's great, Mary.
And informed by all of your careers. So in that campaign, I wasn't really going to be in politics. I was going to take over my mother's business. But right in that, it's actually exactly at this time, 40 years ago, she passed unexpectedly in the middle of the campaign. So as it happens, the campaign manager was a woman. Most of the staff was a woman. And after when my mother died, that woman, Maxine Furstenberg, moved me to Washington, got me a job. I didn't think about policy. I just had to work. I had to work, and I also had to take care of my baby brother and sister. So I found the challenges for me were less gender-based than I just got to get it done. I just have to get it done, and I tried to get it done, and I've tried to get it done in a civil way, in a business that is generously transactional and mostly brutal, sometimes barbaric, and you just have to, and this is the hardest thing, is just know yourself so you don't lose yourself, because somebody's always trying to tell you who you are or what you should be doing in politics, which is by definition collaborative, synergistic, should be. And believe it or not, I'm in DC, so behind the scenes, off the cameras, there is some collaboration still going on. And people who get, and the ambassador is a great testament to this, people get in politics, particularly people who run, like people. They just like people. It's hard on them to be this mean. It's become rote now, but it's both a people business and a transactional business. So I found that those to be the greatest challenges. And the second greatest challenge, and you who have worked in the White House, and Senator, you'll remember this too, it wasn't until the mid 90s that we were allowed to wear pants in the White House.
Right.
I had to wear, when I worked on the campaign, I would wear pretty much what I'm wearing now. Then we'd go to the White House for a meeting, and I had one giant dress, giant polka dot dress in the back of my door. And President Bush took me aside one day. He said, "Do you need a raise, or do you need some help? You only have one dress. I mean, it's just sort of sad." I said, I have more than one dress. I don't have any pantyhose. So that sounds like a little bitty thing. But Carol, you broke it on the Hill, and I don't know when we broke it. I guess Condi, I don't know when. It might have been Condi Rice. That is a little thing, but was a big thing to look the way we be the most effective, and quit telling us who and what and who we are, who we're supposed to support. Carol, you reminded me of the story of my dear friend Donna Brazil in the whichever race. This is my 40th year in presidential races. It was where whatever year this was, half the people were saying to her, "You have to be for Hillary because you're a woman," and the other half were saying, "You have to be for Obama because you're black." She goes, "Y'all, I'm old. I want to be for McCain, so just shut up." Okay, that's like only Donna Brazil could say. I think for myself, and I think even when there's a paternalism, even when it's good-natured or well-meant, it's still infantilizing. I'm not saying this about my husband per se, but men, like particularly men of that age, felt like it was their job for you to not be all you could be. I don't think that's so with these young women, because I have 2 daughters, as some of you do, and they are more than all they can be. In fact, I'm frequently saying, just be a little bit less than all you can be. Okay, so but they have different challenges, harder challenges, in the sense that they have greater options, really have so many options. It can be paralyzing. And I'm finding my own daughters and the women I talk to, because when you have daughters, then you get a lot of daughters. You get all their posse, all their friends, and they are suffering from what I'm not ascribing this to anybody on this webinar, but a persistent problem which continues to be demonstrated not only in the polls but in various studies. The problem with women succeeding, particularly in politics, is not competence, it's confidence. They insist on perfection, and they overwork and they overprepare, even for this, which any of us could do literally in our sleep, probably have had these dreams. How long did you all prepare? I see everybody taking notes now. The ambassador had a whole litany of study that I'm sure she maybe has memorized. Can I add one thing, Senator, and then I'll shut up? In 1869, the Wyoming territorial governance declared voting suffrage for women for the first time in the whole world. New Zealand likes to claim the fame, but it really was the Wyoming territorial government which gave voting rights to women. And not of a copy of the original government order. So it's been a long, hard fight. Voting is the beginning, not the end of what we have to get done to be successful in politics, and more particularly in this day and age, I think policy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, thank you, Mary. Thank you. Next, I want to turn to somebody who's probably familiar to the Executives Club because she is a former president and CEO of the Executives Club. I first met her when she ran for Congress out in those infamous suburbs, in the infamous suburbs of Chicago, and flipped a seat from red to blue way back when. And so, Melissa Dean, let me turn to you.
Thank you so much, Tina, and to Margaret and Dean and the Executives Club. Thanks for hosting this. I think it's an important topic. I think, as both Mary alluded to and Ambassador Braun, democracy is something we all care about, but you have to work at it. You can't take it for granted. And I think too many Americans have. We owe so much of a debt of gratitude to the suffragettes who worked hard so that we now as women have the right to participate, and yet many don't. And I think democracy only works with an informed and an engaged electorate. And informed is key, because it's hard to be informed because there's so much disinformation and misinformation out there. It's hard to really be informed about who represents you, but you need to know that, and you need to stay involved, I feel. And I don't think I've sometimes heard that directed towards young women, that they don't participate enough, but we have many peers, those of us that are in this panel today, who also really don't participate. And I think it's a shame, because we bring different perspective on many issues to the polling places. I'd also say don't trust the polls, because sometimes people had the excuse, well, my candidate was going to win anyway, or they're going to be fine, so I don't need to show up. And as someone who lost my seat after 3 terms in the House by just over 200 votes out of over 200,000 cast, I can attest to the fact that there were many people who called me later and said, I'm so sorry, I should have voted. But you asked to introduce ourselves. So my background is 20 years in technology, as a technology executive. I also have had my own business. I then decided to run for Congress and did that, and served 3 terms in the House of Representatives, which was a very humbling experience and a great honor. And as Mary alluded to, there is more collaboration than is discussed, particularly by those that are near the center and haven't moved to these polarized extremes. And that's where work really does get done, is in the center. So I was glad to bring sort of my business background to Congress and use that towards results, and proud of what we were able to accomplish when I was there. I'm now back in the private sector, having first worked at the Executives Club, JP Morgan Chase, as chair of the Midwest, and now as CEO of Wealth Management at Mesero Financial. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks, Melissa. And then finally, I want to introduce somebody who's really, right in the center of what's happening right now with women running for office, and the record number of women who've been running and winning in the last cycle and in this cycle. She is the founder and the head of She Should Run, which is an amazing organization operating across the country. Erin Luce-Cottraro, let me turn it over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tina and Margaret and Dean and the Executive Club. It is such an amazing honor to just be part of this incredible crew of women. And I, in the sort of opening phase there, I'm constantly in awe of the way that myself and others who work in this space stand on the shoulders of so many incredible women, many of whom are unrecognized in history books. And I so appreciate the opportunity to live in the history of that and share that as part of this conversation. My background is, I'm actually a Missourian. I was born and raised in Missouri, primarily raised by a really hardworking fighter single mom who we didn't spend a lot of time talking about politics. She was somebody who put deep in my soul a get stuff done type attitude, and I found that I carried that forward professionally. I went into public education. I ultimately went into learning and development and was working in the corporate sector before I was recruited to join my very first campaign, which was a statewide campaign for someone I deeply admire, Robin Carnahan, who in that race was ultimately elected Secretary of State of Missouri. It was my first moment in kind of getting a crash course into the experience that, in that case, just that woman had on the campaign trail. But then also, once she was elected and I served on her official team, really understanding, clearly Secretary of State, serving as his primary role in being the chief election officer, and what that meant around access and what that meant in terms of women's leadership, and her being, a voice of leadership with secretaries across the country. I moved that forward. I was so truly just transformed when I kind of connected the dots between somebody like in Robin, who cared so deeply about her state, her country, and sort of what could be done for good for so many people in elected office, that I knew at that point there was no turning back. Politics was going to be a path for me. I went on and served in a political director role and worked with women all across the country who were sort of making that case to institutional players that they had what it took. And so I got to see the challenge. I got to see the real effort that had to be put in, especially for women of color, that had to be put in to make the case that that these women were worthy of a lot of the institutional support out there. I got pretty impatient after working for a number of cycles and seeing like, okay, there's all this money flowing into politics. There's all these incredible women that are elected, but there's not enough. We're not seeing the needle move. And I'm kind of a geek in research, and did the deep sweep, as many do, on okay, what are we not looking at in politics right now? What could we add to the portfolio of work that's happening to really move the needle? And for me, what that moment was, that aha moment was, there was no single nonpartisan effort focused on finding women who were not already thinking of running for office. So, a lot of tremendous support across the aisle, more for the Democrats than Republicans, but for women who had already made the decision, but who was working on incredible women leaders who were getting it done in their communities and workplaces, but not yet running for office. And that's where She Should Run was born. We now operate with a really big mission to add 250,000 women to the political pipeline by 2030. We also do operate in a nonpartisan space. I consider that a great gift because we get to find ways for women to find common ground, which is so necessary in this country, while also valuing, look, we need all the best that we can find in this country to bring that perspective and experience to the table. So that's my background. I'm excited for more conversation.
Oh, well, thank you. So Carol, I want to ask you a question because I love the stories from Mary and Aaron about how that switch got turned on, right? Like how they got turned on to politics. And you and I have been working together in Illinois politics for going way back. But I'd love to hear from you sort of what was it that compelled you, to go in, you and I first met when you were in the state legislature here in Illinois, to go into politics, and how do we get more women of color to make that switch and feel that issue?
Well, in truth, I think what the last speaker was just saying, that's part of the issue, is to have somebody out there that people can turn to for structural and organizational support, because it does seem overwhelming. And particularly when you're both Black and female, you just don't have the kind of technical support for your run. I didn't know I was going to be a politician. I got involved. I've been a bird watcher, looking for bobolinks in Jackson Park when I first got started. And when I did decide that I was going to run for the state legislature, one of the pundits in the community, Tina, I know you know this person, but they remain nameless, said to me, "Don't run. You can't possibly win. The Blacks won't vote for you because you're not part of the Chicago machine. The whites won't vote for you because you're Black, and nobody's going to vote for you because you're a woman." Well, for me, given my kind of nature and my character, that was all I needed to hear. That was the beginning of my campaign right there. It was like, okay, I clearly have to do this. And so I threw my hat in the ring in what was a hotly contested fight for Bob Mann's state legislative seat, and I won. It was a huge field, and frankly, when I won, another woman won, and that was Barbara Flynn Curry. And so when the two of us won together, of course, the press dubbed it the Year of the Woman, which of course happens time and time again. If more than one woman wins, they call it the Year of the Woman. It's like, well, why is not every year a Year of the Woman? Why is this so unique? Why is it so special? And we need to make it more ordinary. And the way we do that is to have efforts to pull together pull together the women who are out there who have the credentials and the capacity and the competence to serve, and get those women, give them the support they need to get into the political fray.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And Mary, I was struck in your opening comments about that point about confidence, because I agree with you, right? I think that is the issue that even today, to this day, you know, as Carol talks about the confidence that she had back then, I think it's still an issue for so many of us. What advice do you have? Because you really stepped into your confidence at a time when there were very few women in places like the White House, in Republican administrations, in, you know, and outspoken. You know, I've just so admired your ability to be outspoken on hard issues. What advice do you have for young women, you know, on developing that kind of confidence?
You know, on the south side of Chicago, which you all can attest to, Gades, I grew up at 93rd and Commercial, and I was the oldest offspring of the oldest son going back to Croatia, one of those things. So they just, you know, there was no gender. There was, you will perform in this family standard. So I think I was really blessed by that. You know, and we had all kinds of issues. I think I came with confidence, but I also, the confidence born of what Aaron said, GSD, get stuff done. I grew up a Kennedy Democrat. I voted for Carter. Everybody, Mayor Daley was a god to all of us. Okay, so I didn't really have, but I did know myself, and I knew what my values were, and I knew what the values were, the people that I loved being with and loved collaborating with. And that's what we're all throwing names around, and I never thought about racism. I am now, but I wasn't a racist or bigamist or, I mean, a misogynist. I was an assist, okay? If you were an ass, get out of my face. If you were anything else of any religion, short, tall, whatever, and you could like to get stuff done, come on down. And this is the best example of this that I can think of was when our kids were 8 and 10, we moved to Katrina. We moved to New Orleans after Katrina, and it was a hot mess. And my husband and I said to then Mitch Landrieu, wasn't mayor and didn't want to run again, had already run and didn't want to get into it again. You have to run. This city's counting on you. We moved our family down here. And let me tell you something, ladies. You got stuff done, sorry. Were the women. They were old, they were young, they were black, they were white, they were rich, they weren't rich, they were uptown, the last rally we had for Mitch, I'm getting goosebumps thinking there's 1,500 women in a ballroom, and we invited all the high school kids, the Sacred Heart girls. My daughter got to see this, and Irma Thomas, 1,500 women have just described, Irma Thomas and Mitch Landrieu sang a duet. Now, people don't know that Mitch Landrieu studied theater and has a great voice. That is politics, and we got stuff done. I know we get bad press. We have a great mayor now, LaToya Cantrell. Go to New Orleans. And you don't have to be, and I admire people who do run and get in there, but I think part of the reason women don't is because they like to get stuff done. And there's an impracticability and an incivility. There always was in politics. It's just politics ain't beanbag, as we used to say. And women tend to want to be more polite. And Aaron, if I have any advice for your group, which I love, why do we run? More women would run if they didn't have to run like men. If they didn't have to be brutes and rude and name calling, ball busting, and if you just could work the way you live, the way you talk to your daughters. And it does take a village to do a campaign, to give the support to the person. But I'd also say if you don't want to run for office, because let's face it, women are just not as egomaniacal, present company excluded. I don't mean that for running for office, but it takes a lot of just ego you don't want to waste on people who are not worth the time that you're wasting it on. When you just want to get stuff done, there are lots of ways to be a leader and not be notoriously a leader, because particularly in this day and age, Senator Brown, I want to say this to you, mostly Brown. If you had to be, I banned myself from TV on the grounds of the debate, and I'm saying this on both sides, it's like being in a cage with monkeys throwing feces. I feel like I don't watch it.
I love Mary Matlin.
I know who I am. I ain't a soccer mom, a suburban mom, a this mom. Every year is a year of women. Every year is a different kind of woman. They're still telling us you're a security mom, or you're a suburban woman, or you're a white educated whatever the hell. You're just like, quit hyphenating me with what kind of woman I am. I'm just let's go back. I am woman, I am strong. Get the hell out of my way, which is kind of an attitude, not always embraced by my husband and some men that I've worked with, but it is a necessary one for politics, which is a tough business. It doesn't need to be as mean and as tough and as uncivil as it is. So I hope your women can learn how to run like they would run a church bazaar.
Well,
or whatever.
Why don't you pick up on that? Because I've sort of seen like Lauren Underwood and some others, I think, starting to try to run as who they are, right? And speak to people as who they are. And Erin, I don't know if that's what you're seeing with some of your candidates. You know, can we have 100%. A different kind of politics and a different kind of candidate?
I would love to say that we have fully turned the corner on that. I don't think we're there yet, but I think you're seeing more and more examples of women who are willing to do that. And I think the more that we can amplify those stories, shine a light on those women, the more it will become something that is accepted. I'm always pleased to see, again, I'm a geek of the research, that you know, there are some incredible researchers that have been looking at the field cycle after cycle, and there is actually movement in culture on this and voter attitudes on this. Voters are hungry for they're hungry for what women can do so effectively and do so effectively, which is connect on kitchen table issues and beyond. They're just real. And the more and it's where that used to be a challenge. It used to be something that was often coached out in candidates. It is now something that not in all districts, not in all races, but it is something that more and more we're seeing that women can lean into. And frankly, that's how we're going to get more women to run. Because your point, Mary, like how many, we can't possibly fill the pipeline that we need with people who have to try to be someone they're not. And in fact, you know, it is what our communities are so hungry for right now, is like, we need the people in this country who are closest to the pain in this country to feel like they can step up, be exactly who they are, and serve. And so as we see that, and we are seeing that, we just have to keep celebrating it. We have to keep, even as women, we have to keep ourselves from a place of like picking away at like, I just wish she would have, it's like hard to come from that place, but like, nope, guess what? It's going to be imperfect. And that is what is great. That is what we need.
Oh, great. So Melissa, one of the things that I've seen is that business people tend to shy away from politics for like all the reasons that Mary just described. When I was in business, I was a business lawyer for years, and the number of actually senior business people who would tell me they weren't registered to vote even was shocking, because business people kind of looked at, and yet politics governance defines the landscape for everyone, right? And you made that, you've gone back and forth, from business. We've got a lot of people in business in the audience as executive club members. Can you talk to us about why it's important for business women to get involved and how to get involved?
Well, I think coming from a business background actually is very advantageous, because in business, to Mary's point, it's about getting stuff done. It is about accountability and a results orientation. That's how you move things forward in the business community. You also have to collaborate. So I think people from the business community tend to be closer to the center. And by center, it doesn't mean that you don't still come from a philosophical or political viewpoint that may embrace values from the right or the left, but that you're close enough that you can hear the other side, that you can respect good ideas from the other side, and you can find common ground to make things happen. And so what you find, what I found in Washington, is it was those that were more towards the center that were able to, that I could work with, and we could get things done and didn't stand in their partisan corners and say my way or the highway. And so I think it can be really advantageous for business people to run, men and women for that matter. You talked about authenticity, about running as who you are. I think, again, that's not a female thing. I think that's a male or female thing. If you think about Joe Biden even being able to embrace the fact that he was a stutterer and put that into the convention, when you go back to FDR never wanting to be photographed in his wheelchair, I think we've come a long way in that people really want to trust people as who they really are. And I think when you try not to be your authentic self, people get to know that. But I do think we've almost gone to this culture of it. It's become about who that candidate wants to be about. It's not really about you, though. It's really about listening to the people that you're there to serve. And I think women do that pretty well. And so there should be more who engage and participate. In terms of business people not wanting to pay attention to politics, I think it's become confusing. There's a lot of disinformation. It's hard to find a good news source that isn't just a reflection of a particular partisan view. Even the media has become partisan, and that's unfortunate. So you have to read a lot to be able to balance what you read from this paper that has a right orientation of this paper that has a left orientation, and kind of find the truth, reading both. I used to make my staff, we had to read the editorial pages every day of both the Wall Street and the New York Times, and what was true in both was probably true, because sometimes you could read an editorial about the exact same event and it didn't even sound like it was the same event. And so you have to work at it, but not just representatives, but people have to work at it too. And I would say business people need to work at it a little harder too, and not just accept what they're fed, and not also just be focused on the lobbying interest that represents their industry, but you know, wear your corporate hat, sure, but wear your citizen hat as well.
Great. I want to just sort of remind folks, if you want to put questions into the chat, you can do that, and we'll try to get to them. Yeah, Carol, you know, one of the things we've been seeing is obviously a lot of activism by young people, and especially by young Black women, leading a lot of the protests we've seen on the streets, you know, speaking out. And yet I'm also hearing many of those same young people not translating that activism into voting, right, or into the electoral process. Can you talk to us about that, and how can we address that with those young people?
Tina, I appreciate the question. And let me say also, I associate myself with, was that Aaron who was just talking just now? Or that wasn't Mary.
Melissa was just talking about business, yeah.
Was that Melissa? Okay, Melissa, I associate myself with your remarks. Whatever it is you said, I agree with everything you said. But let me add this. The fact of the matter is, and you're right, young people are out here protesting and marching, but haven't put the dots together that voting has anything to do with that. And that's our fault. When I say our fault, I mean people in the political class have failed to connect the dots for them, because they, you know, and for the business community as well. Your point is very well taken. Business people have a tendency to sit back and complain about politicians, but don't function, or other than to write checks from time to time, don't participate in the process. And that's not right either. Our democracy absolutely positively requires participation. That is bottom line, and even with what I read from Thomas Jefferson, bottom line, it requires the consent of the governed. So people who have to follow rules really do have to participate in making them. And that doesn't mean carrying water for your trade association. That means looking at your interests, trying to suss out which candidates are going to advance those interests, whatever they are. And then once you've figured that out, then participating, and again, whether it's writing checks or signing a letter or giving somebody encouragement, whatever it takes to do something to participate in whatever way is comfortable for you. And I think that really is, that's what we have to do for these young people. And I've been trying to talk to them because they don't see the connection between politics. What they see is just a continual argument. And when you look at and even the media, the fact of the matter is that it's not new that the media would be partisan on one way or another. They've always been that way. The difference is that back before our time, they were more transparent and more obvious about it. You knew there were Republican papers and there were Democrat papers. I mean, poor Abraham Lincoln just got beat up by the press that didn't like him. And so, you know, it's always been that way. We just have to be clear and make it a point to show the young people that, look, this argument does concern you. This is an argument about your future, about your life and your community, your family, and bring it home to them in ways that make it real, as opposed to just an abstract argument about stuff that has nothing to do with them.
Yeah. Mary, I want to ask you a question about, you know, do you, because you're a really astute political observer and advisor, and do you think there's a difference between women who are rising in the Republican Party and the challenges they face and women who are rising in the Democratic Party and the challenges they face, or is it kind of the same? I mean, these are the issues that we as women are just facing across the board.
You know, that's an interesting question, and I've thought about it because we were pre-given the questions. Not that I, you know, wrote everything down, because I'm not a perfectionist, as evidenced by my roots here. I think there's a perception that there's some big difference, but when the rubber hits the road, it's a get stuff done. There are, I mean, I deal with Democratic and Republican women, and they tend to come to the world as I do, meaning I get up in the morning and I'm a mother, a wife, so-so wife, a sister, a Catholic, a New Orleanian. Do you know what I mean? I tick down the list, and then I get along with people like that. And when I've been in politics, I never had a problem with any disproportionate attention or effort. The only problem I had, and this is personal to me, is sitting in meetings where it's so cliche, but it's so true. I just want to get stuff done. I don't want to hear every man say the same thing that's already been said, but they need to say it in their own words. And I know that's cliche, but Melissa, it's true. And particularly for business people, they're used to, you go to a meeting, you get it done, you give action items, you give accountability, and you get the hell out of there. Okay, so that's what I think women of both parties bring to it. And I am suggesting that, of course, Republicans and Democrats have a different philosophy of governance. I'm reading, for all the stuff that you can't look at today, I'm reading Plutarch, the Lives, and Socrates and Augustine. This is not new stuff, ladies. This is all old stuff. I did a whole paper on Cicero's brother's campaign, and he was just as messy and dirty as us. It's not that women can't do that. They just prefer to be, as opposed, and I don't love men. I love men, but so often they're underprepared and overconfident, and they lean in anyways. Forget leaning in. Jump in, ladies. Just jump in. No one's going to remember if your nails weren't done, or I find my Democratic women friends are women before even though they're philosophical, like Don and I agree on our faith and our football team. That is it. But and our cooking, okay? We like to cook and we like to drink red wine. But nothing could be, you know, and it's not like we don't talk about politics. I can have very many civil conversations, and I'm begging her right now to teach me what I don't know about the history of Black women. And it's fascinating. Her mama was a Creole. Her daddy was like a voodoo Catholic preacher. It's a fascinating history. And as my mother always said to me, you got to walk a mile in somebody else's moccasins. So I find Republican and Democratic moccasins that fit a petite little woman's foot, which would not be mine. That is, if left to their own devices and not being forced to run like men, you know, and like they're gonna throw a hard hat at somebody, I find that they just want to, and Melissa, you keep calling the center, I call it the, what can we, at the practical place, the happy practical space, what can we get done? What can we get done in a way that we can measure if it's successful or not successful, and fix what isn't working and keep tweaking stuff. If any of you sew, or I paint and sew and pot and all that, you get it out there and then you refine it. I think that's more, it's peculiar to women, but when women, Republicans and Democratic women, get forced into this system that makes them deny the sisterhood, which is far deep. It's precedes the red tent. You know what I mean? It's deeper. It's in our DNA. It's so, it's spiritual. They're not, they'd rather be in that space than in a, you believe in more guns than I believe, whatever. I mean, I have an AR downstairs. My husband's about ready to shoot me with it. I mean, I'm not going to fight with my girlfriends about that kind of stuff. And nobody ever agrees with me anyways on anything, no matter what their party. I don't even agree with myself half the time. So that's a very windy way of saying, I do not think there are a lot of women in Republican women or running or thinking about running, but they tend to come from places that, and this may be the difference between Republicans and Democrats, they tend to come from other professions that have been frustrated in whatever they're trying to do. Ranchers, accountants, farmers, you know, that kind of stuff that were, in fact, that's how I got in. My mother's beauty school, which was all women at the time, had to have and we didn't have much money for this, her beauty school, she had to have a man's bathroom and a woman's bathroom because the state said so. I said, what state? Who's the state? Do you know, like, why do we have to have a man's bathroom? No men, now I know it's different now, but no men ever come in here. And the women could not use the men's bathroom. The empty, hysterically clean men's bathroom. Okay, that's like, that doesn't make sense to a Republican or a Democrat, or particularly to a woman. I'm not being as articulate about this as I'm hoping, Aaron, you can pass on to your candidates. And I know Melissa already knows, it's not, there is a big philosophical divide, but at the end of the day, as I said about the Katrina example, mamas in particular, and grandmas and sisters, they want to go home at night and do what they do with their families, their significant other, their dogs or their cats or whatever. You know, they just don't want to be hysterical all the time. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no. I mean that I love that happy practical space description, and I saw glimmers of it when I was in the White House, and you know, there were moments where the Republican women in Congress and the Democratic women would come together for a solution. We had a budget solved, actually, right, by the women coming together. But you're right, your observation that women get forced into a system, right, that doesn't allow them to do that, and which means we got to change the system. We're almost out of time. This has been amazing. I want to ask one more round of questions to all of you, which is, since we are here just the week after Labor Day, we are now in the countdown to the November election. If you can all just really say why it's important to you and to sort of all of the folks who tuned into this to vote this year. Carol, let's start with you.
Well, I thought we weren't supposed to be partisan.
Well, there is that. We're supposed to be nonpartisan.
Yeah. But voting is very important. Again, back to the fundamentals. If people don't vote, they're not counted. And if you don't care about the future of the country, if you don't care about your family, your community, if you don't care about the direction that things are going to take, and particularly now, because in post-COVID, I mean, everything's going to change because of COVID. And so if you don't care about the direction that our country is going to take in response to this pandemic, then sit it out. But if you do care and you do want to see change, or you want to see things made better, not change, but you want to get things done, back to Melissa's point, which I think was critical. You want to get things done, you have to participate in the process. You have to have your 2 cents heard, and that's what your vote is.
Great, thank you. Mary?
I honest to God have a nonpartisan view about this, and I think it goes to my people coming from the old country, where they there wasn't an option to vote. My daughters and I were just talking about this. The first time my baby daughter gets to vote. And when they were little, and every election since, we all went as a family. And I love voting, and they love voting, and they get really upset if they ran out of the stickers. I voted, and we all come out and we hug and we cry. Now, my vote is canceled 3 times out when I go with my family, but the notion of voting is everything the senator, ambassador, I forget how this title of business goes, said. Plus, it is a unique and again, almost spiritual experience to be able to cast that vote and presume that there's a sanctity of the process. And you know what? There isn't. It's messy. But my daughters and I and James are all driving down to New Orleans, where we're all registered to vote, so we can all go together with the dogs and go behind the booth and come out, and they can all make fun of me, and we can all wear stickers. It's just, it makes you feel good, people. Go do it.
No, good. That's a good message. Melissa?
Well, I think if you believe this election, as I do, is critical, you have to do more than vote. You have to get your friends to vote. You got to get your family to vote. You got to go knock doors. You got to pick up the phone. We can't knock doors in a pandemic, but you can get GOTV, which is get out the vote calls. I've done it before. I'll be doing it again. I think this is a time where we have to recognize that the challenges and the opportunities that we face as a species are global. If we want a strong economy, we're all interconnected now. We need a strong global economy. If we want a planet that will support our species, that has to be addressed globally. And today, more than ever, if we want to be healthy, and you look at this global pandemic, we have to work across the borders and with other countries. And so I want a leader that has responsibly demonstrated an ability to work with the rest of the world, who has turned economies around, who has addressed pandemics, who cares about the planet. So you know who my vote's for. And so I'm going to be working really hard for Joe.
Oh, well, finally, Erin, we're a little over time. I apologize, but Erin, you're fine.
I'll make it quick. Those were all such wonderful comments. Look, I think I'm a true believer. It's why I do the work I do, that our country, our world can't thrive unless people participate and unless we build for a future that is a representative democracy. And it is a responsibility and a privilege. It's something that, I take my daughters, I have young daughters, I take my daughters to the polls. I think, Melissa, what you shared about that, the influence that we can have on peers in just even saying how important it is to us to do it can change lives for the better, can change our country for the better.
And I will just say to everybody, make a plan. That's what we're telling everybody. Make a plan, find out the deadlines to get an absentee ballot, if that's what you need to do, or what your early vote is and where to go, because this is a year where you need to have a plan and know how you're going to vote.
One other thing, take a picture of your ballot. Sadly, it's going to be an ugly, contested mess, regardless of which way it goes. So take a picture of your ballot, whether it's a mail-in ballot, before you send it, so you can show that you completed it properly, no hanging chad stuff, and take a picture on a time-based, when you put it in the post office. And if you go to the post office, or did you go to the polling place, take a picture there too. It's sad, but you got to think that way.
All right. Well, thank you all. This was amazing. Thank you, Carol, Mary, Melissa, Erin. I'm going to turn it back over to Margaret. But thanks to the Executives Club for having us.
That's all I was going to say is thank you. I wish we could be here for another 3 hours. I know there was so much more we wanted to get into. Thank you all for sharing your time, Ambassador, Melissa, Erin, Mary, and Tina, and this wonderful discussion and everything that you all have done and continue to do to champion women in politics and the importance of getting out the vote. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you.
Thank you.